Kansas City territory at one point in time was probably the most solid of all of them across the country.
Kansas City probably was my bread and butter town.
Would I do it again? Absolutely. Orville Brown was a great big country boy. He was so big bones and just a strong big man.
He had short legs, relatively, and a long body. A physically powerful man. He was very strong, and you couldn't believe how quick he was.
Was a showman, but he knew how to wrestle too. And he was big enough and strong enough that nobody could mess with him.
And there was this kid that's about 15 years old, and he comes wandering around there, and one guy said, "You better be careful there." He says, "You know who that is?" And he says, "No." He says, "That's Orville Brown." And he says, "He's world heavyweight wrestling champion." "What do you mean world champion?" He says, "Well, he can beat anybody in the world." He comes up and says, "He can't beat anybody in the world." And my dad was sitting there, his feet was out like this, and he reached up, I mean, just like this. He hooks his right foot behind that kid's heel, and he kicks him in the knee and sent him flying about 15 feet. Dad was just sitting there relaxed, went boom, and that kid flew, and you didn't see, he didn't come near my dad after that.
He made his fame in wrestling by the drop kick and by running at people and knocking them over. And he'd go over the top rope and land 8 rows deep into ringside, knocking chairs everywhere, and climb out of it. Didn't bother him.
He was orphaned when he was 11 years old. He lived down in southern Kansas, down around Medicine Lodge, Kansas. He went to Medicine Lodge High School 1 year. When he was about 12, 14 years old, he worked as a blacksmith helper. A wrestling manager by the name of Ernest Brown, no relation, but he came in, and by this time he had built himself up into a pretty good physical specimen. And the guy walked by and says, "My God, man, what are you doing in the blacksmith shop?" So he got him started, and then he wrestled on carnivals and wherever he could. And the first, he had 72 matches. He never lost a fall. Then he got enough of a reputation that they put him on the card in Wichita. A wrestler by the name of A.B. Coleman saw him, and he called Tom Pax in St. Louis. Now, Tom was one of the biggest promoters in the country. And he said, "Tom, you ought to see this kid. He's going to be a real world beater." Tom called him in and told him, he said, "Young man, you have a really great potential." Well, this was the height of Depression, about 1933, 34. And Tom Pax on his desk has a great big checkbook, and he opens it up like this, and he writes Dad a check and hands it to him. Dad looked at it, the check was for $5,000, and he had never seen that much money in his life, and he said, "I'll never be able to pay this back." Tom said, "I'll get my money back."
Orville took his wife Grace and his son Richard and moved to Baltimore. He found a place to set up a ring and worked out with some of the all-time greats, including George Zaharias, who also later married Olympic gold medalist and golfing great Babe Didrikson in 1938. In August of 1933, world heavyweight champion, the Golden Greek Jim Londos, set up his training headquarters in Philadelphia. He was preparing for his title match against Ed Strangler Lewis. Londos put out the word that he was looking for young sparring partners. Rookies were beaten as quickly as they came in until Orville Brown showed up.
In those days up there, when those things were going on, you had a lot of photographers and newspaper people, and they were all around, and Dad was working out with Londos, and he had him hooked. I mean, he really had him hooked, and Londos couldn't get out. And he looked up at Londos's manager. His name was Ed White, and Ed goes, "No." So Dad let Londa get away, because here's all these newspaper guys. And he called Dad in afterward and says, well, Orville, I don't think we need you anymore. And so he had about 3 big matches with Londas. He never did beat Londas, but they were super good matches. One of them he had Londas, he felt he had him beat, and a flash photographer took a picture in those days with light bulb, blue glass all over the ring, so I had to stop and sweep it up, and Londas got his breath, and Dad thought that kept him from winning.